Good morning. How are you today? Excellent. I missed you. I was gone for 2 weeks. And I should tell you, I've been married for 34 years. And she's put up with me for 34 years. And I've been in ministry for 35 years, and she's put up with ministry for 35 years. And we've never been to Europe, so for the last 2 weeks, we flew into Amsterdam, got on a boat, and sailed to Switzerland. And then we spent a few days in Paris, and it was gorgeous. But I missed you, because it just doesn't feel like Sunday when I'm not with you. But you need to know that I couldn't have been able to do that for my wife if it wasn't for the incredible team here at the Summit who does such a superlative job all the time, especially obvious in my absence. And I understand Ryan Schreckengast did a superb job while I was gone. Yeah. He's such a phenomenal gift. I thank God for him, and I thank God for you. And I'm thrilled that you're here. It was Maya Angelou who said that a young cynic is one of the most tragic things in life. She said a young cynic has gone from knowing nothing to believing nothing. And it's heartbreaking. We live in a cynical culture. We live in a cruel culture. We live in a culture where incivility is the norm. And I'm not just talking about Washington, because you see, it has seeped out throughout the nation. Now here's the question, and it's intended to be probing and provocative. You know people who are not spiritual, who are not religious, who may not even believe in God, and certainly make it known that they're not a follower of Christ. You know people like that, don't you? Now here's the question. What distinguishes your life from theirs? Because if they're your neighbor or your coworker or your cousin or your friend, and their life is indistinguishable from your life, then are you really following Jesus? Because shouldn't there be a difference in our culture between a Christian and everyone else? In this age of cynicism, in this age of cruelty and incivility, shouldn't there be something distinctively different about us? Don't you see? You're the handwork of God. And God has made you wondrously and beautifully. And it's God's intention and will that you will live a life of joy and love. And it ought to show. It ought to distinguish you from the world you inhabit. You see, I think a lot of people, at some point in their life journey, they came to the conclusion that yes, there is a God, and God showed his love in Jesus Christ, who lived and died that we might have life eternal. And they came to that as a set of beliefs, and they accepted it, and they act as if that's it. And that's really just the beginning. Because living a life of love and grace and following Jesus Christ, don't you see, that's a work of constant restoration. And that's what I want to talk to you about today and next week. A short series, and it's simply entitled Restore. Because here's what I believe with all my life. I believe that God wants to restore life in your life, to bring great joy and delight and living, and to do it in such a way that you are so different than the world you inhabit. Come on, let me take you to the scripture. There are 2 passages I want to explore with you. The first is from Romans 12. This is Paul writing to the church at Rome. And the second is Jesus. Now here's what's so fascinating about these 2 parallel passages. Paul speaks in the theoretical. Jesus gives us the very practical application of life. Let me show you. If you turn to Romans 12:2, and I'll put it up on the screen so that you can follow along with me. I want to read from 2 different translations. The first is from the New English Translation. It's a very good, very literal translation. And the beautiful thing about reading parallel translations by different translators is you see things you otherwise would have missed. Let me show you. This is the New English Translation. This is what Paul wrote. He said, "Do not be conformed to this present world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may test and approve what is the will of God, what is good and well-pleasing and perfect." And that's where it ends. And that makes sense, doesn't it? You kind of understand what he's hinting at. But let me show you the same passage translated by Eugene Peterson in the Message. And look at the parallels, look at the differences, and allow them to illuminate what Paul is saying. This is how Peterson translates the same passage. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You'll be changed from the inside out. Readily recognize what he wants from you and quickly respond to it. Unlike the culture around you, always dragging you down to its level of immaturity, God brings out the best of you, develops well-formed maturity in you. And that's one of those aha moments, because you read both translations of the same passage, and all of a sudden it begins to click. And then you understand the question as to what distinguishes you from the culture you inhabit. Now, as I said, Paul gives us a theoretical. Jesus makes this very, very practical. He's addressing the disciples and his listeners, and he uses everyday examples, and he shows them a new Christian ethic, a new way of living that is radically different than anything that has gone before and anything that will ever come after. Listen to what he said, and here's what I hope to accomplish with you. I want to show you what he said and how it was relevant then, because you can't know what it means now if you don't know what it meant then. But once you understand what he was saying, then it's kind of like the lights come on. And it's another one of those aha moments, and you go, I get it. I understand how I am to live. Let me show you. This is what Jesus said. You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if anyone would sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, and do not refuse the one who would borrow from you. You see what he's doing here. You see how the passages run in parallel. Paul is giving us the hypothetical, the theoretical. Jesus Christ, as he always does, gives us the very practical and shows us how to apply it. He's really giving us a biblical strategy, not only for civility in life, but a new lifestyle for Christians that's radically different than the world we inhabit. Let's walk through this. And I want to take you back to the passage, because this is great stuff. This is rich stuff. Am I the only one excited about this stuff? I mean, this is really good stuff. Let's walk through this and figure out what he's saying. First of all, he begins by saying, you have heard it said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. And we cringe because that seems so archaic, so primitive. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. You kill somebody, that you're going to get killed. But you got to understand the context under which this whole Mosaic law developed. The first law that was codified was the Sumerians back 2,200 years before Jesus even lived. Hammurabi, who was the Babylonian king, he codified a set of laws called Hammurabi's Code in about 1750, 1760 before Christ. Now here's what's interesting. In both of those sets of law, there were basically double standards. There were standards for the nobles, the royals and the nobles, and then there were standards for the commons and standards for the slaves. And they were all different. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth was the same in all for the nobles, not for anyone else, because they didn't count. Now what's interesting, in Moses' law, which was crafted about 1,440 years before Jesus lived, all that changes. Because the heart of it is, under the Mosaic law, an offense against another human being isn't just a travesty against them, it is an offense against God. And that's why in the Mosaic Law, this is so cool, in the Mosaic Law, there's no distinction in terms of nobles, commoners, or slaves. A life is a life, which is a radical concept 1,400 years before Jesus lived. But Jesus takes it to the next level. He says, you've heard it say an eye for an eye or tooth for a tooth. I've got a new code. I've got a new set of standards. I've got a new ethic for living that I want to share with you. And what did that look like? This is what he said. He said, do not resist the evil or the evil one. Now what's he saying? You see, he's talking to people in his own band of followers and in the larger group because there were actual terrorists in the first century. They were called Sicarii because they were called Sicarius because they carried a Sicarii. They were named after a little dagger. And what they would do in the crowds, they'd slip up to the Romans or the collaborators and they'd knife them, they'd kill them, they'd assassinate them. They were meeting evil with evil. And Jesus is saying, don't do that. Because you reduce yourself to the level of your enemy, of your appointment, your enemy, your adversary. And he said, that's not how we live. We follow a greater standard. What does that look like? He said that we are not only to not resist the evil, but if someone dare strike you on the right cheek, you're to turn and offer them the other. Now, I need your help for this. Are you up for it? Nobody's up for it. Are you up for it? All right, if you're seated near someone, I need you to kind of turn and face toward them, okay? Do that right now. Don't look at me. Look at each other, okay? And I want both of you to take your finger and put it on your own right cheek, okay? Put it on your own right cheek. Put it on your own right cheek right now. Now look at each other. Don't look anywhere else. Look at each other. And put your hand on your right cheek and ask yourself, how would you go about hitting that person on that cheek? You don't have to do it. I saw some of you already starting. Don't get ahead of me here. How would you do it? Now, assuming that you're right hand dominant, how would you do it? Well, it's obvious. Yes, it's the backhand slap. That's how you hit somebody's right cheek. It's a backhand slap. And here's what's so fascinating. It means the same thing in the 21st century as it meant in the first century. It's demeaning. It's disrespectful. It's dishonoring. It's saying to someone, you're unworthy. You are less than me. And in the first century, that meant you were either a woman, a child, or a slave. Do you understand the implication? And Jesus, this is what's so amazing. Jesus is speaking to this crowd, and he says, don't let them do that. Don't let them get away with it. Don't let them get into your heart. Don't rent space in your head to a moron. Yes, that's what he's saying. Translation by Preissig. Because you see, what he's doing is, if someone dare backhands you to slap you on the right cheek, you turn and offer them the other. And what is that nonviolent response? It's saying, I will not be demeaned. I will not be denigrated. I will not be dishonored by the likes of you because I refuse to see myself as an inferior. Do you realize how radical that is in the first century? For women, for children, for slaves. We live in a culture of identity crisis. We are so wrapped up in our identity of self, and it's so fragile, it's so brittle, that if you wear the wrong prom dress, you give people fits. It's crazy, wouldn't you agree? And why is it so brittle? Why is our identity so brittle? Because we're so wrapped up in the labels that others lay upon us. And Jesus is saying, have none of that. You are not defined by what the world says of you. You are defined by me. And I define you as a beloved child for whom I'm willing to give my life. Do you see how radical this is? Does it start to come alive and shake you to the very soul? He says, turn the other cheek. He says, if somebody sues you and takes your cloak, give them your tunic as well. If somebody presses you into service and you have to go 1 mile, go the second as well. Let me unpack that for you, because it's important you understand. There were law courts, and you need to understand dress for first century Jewish men. Basically, the first thing that they put on was, they wore a loincloth, and then they put on a tunic, which is kind of like a big sleep shirt, okay? Are you picturing that in your mind? A big sleep shirt. Can you see it? Don't picture me in it, just picture it, all right? A big sleep shirt that comes down below your knees, and that's tied with a belt, and then you wear a cloak, which is kind of like a big shawl that you can put over your head that shelters you from the rain. It's a prayer shawl, and it covers you, and it protects you. Now, the law said that you could take someone's cloak in pledge. Jesus is saying if somebody dares to do that, don't just give them your cloak. Make it an absurd demonstration. Give them your tunic as well. And what is he saying? Make a spectacle of their greed. Make a spectacle of their lack of compassion. And then he says, if you're pressed into service to go 1 mile, go the second. Now, in the Roman world, a Roman soldier could grab any citizen off the street and press you into service unless you were noble. And you had to walk with them and carry whatever they wanted you to carry for 1 mile. But it was clearly prescribed for them to force you to go beyond 1 mile. And imagine how people did that. They're walking, they're going to work, they're going to do whatever they're going to do, and a Roman demands that they carry their stuff for 1 mile. And they're grumbling, and they're cursing, and they're saying this is so wrong, and they're seething with anger and hatred. And Jesus is like, don't let that happen to you. Astound them, surprise them. Make it your choice. Go, not just the 1st mile, the 2nd mile. Because you see, you're demonstrating your freedom because you're no longer under their control. That's what's so amazing. And then he says, give to those who beg, lend to those who would borrow. And this really needs no translation. You've seen the homeless, haven't you? Haven't you seen the homeless? And what do you think when you see them? Have you ever seen someone walk by and say under their breath or out loud, get a job? Have you ever seen it? Have you ever felt it? Have you ever said it? Because if you have, and if you're honest to God, I think all of us have at one time or another, then Christ is speaking directly to us. And he's saying that if you're going to follow Jesus, it means you choose to be compassionate and loving. Now, I know, there are cheaters and those who would steal. In fact, I used to say, look at their shoes, and then you know if they're stealing from you. Because if their shoes are better than what you're wearing, then don't give them anything. And a buddy pulled me aside, and this is a guy with a heart of great compassion, loves the homeless, and works unstintingly, lovingly. He said, Jim, don't do that. Don't say that. He said, because somebody may have just given them those shoes. Talk to them. Find out about them. Get to know them. And why? Because it's the only way you can guard your heart against becoming hardened and cynical. And that's what destroys you from within and makes you no different than the culture you inhabit. So I give. And I know there's a risk because it may be used in a way that I oppose vehemently. But I give. Not just for them, for me. To protect my own heart and to remind me that I trust God who provides everything. You see what Jesus has done? He's laid out 1st century reality. Occurrences, people asking for money, people taking you to court and taking your cloak, being pressed into service. He's laid out what happened then. The question is, what does it mean now? What does it mean for you? This is really the takeaway of the passage. Because you see, following Jesus means choosing a path that is different. What do I mean by that? I really want you to think, and again, this is intended intentionally be very provocative. Everybody thinks this is the church, and it's not. Well, at least not all the time. In fact, this is really only the church on Saturday and Sunday. And why is it the church on Saturday and Sunday? Because you're here. Because you are here. Because the church is not bricks and mortar. The church is flesh and blood. And that means wherever you go the rest of the week, wherever you are throughout the week, you're the church being carried out into the world. That means if you're going to school tomorrow. It means if you're going to be graduating this week. Or maybe you're going to work, or you're driving 470, or you're retired and you're going to go play golf. Or maybe you're not retired and you're still going to go play golf. Wherever you go, don't you see, you're the church. And you're representing Christ. You saw the tragic Southwest Flight 1380. You saw the news about that. You know what was amazing is Tammy Jo Schultz. I'm so impressed. I mean, she's a product of the United States Air Force. She was the first woman fighter pilot. She flew a Hornet. She served with honor and distinction, and then she went to work in the commercial airlines, and she flies for Southwest. And I was so impressed. I mean, I don't know what happened with the engine. FAA will tell us in about a year. But I know what happened in the cockpit, because they've given us a good accounting. And it reflected so beautifully on this calm soul who was in complete control of herself, her airplane, and her people. And she did something heroic. She saved a lot of lives. But what I love is when she was interviewed afterward, she said, flying for Southwest is an opportunity for her to live out her faith and exhibit it and share it with the world. Is that what people say about you? At home, at work, at school, on the golf course, on 470. I didn't even intend that to be funny. You see, following Jesus means choosing a path that is different. And let's take it a step further. Following Jesus means choosing to be wonderfully weird. That's not a misspelling. I'm serious. It means being wonderfully weird. Because look at our culture. Our culture is cynical. Our culture is cruel. Our culture is uncivil. And that's the culture, that's the world we inhabit. And if you're not any of those things, you're choosing to be wonderfully weird. I mean, think of the people. Think of the most joyous people you know. People who are a little wacky, a little off plumb. I mean, people who have their own sense of fun and fashion, and they're just kind of refreshing and different. You got somebody in mind? Are they a Christian? Because if not, something's horribly wrong. And this is the problem in the world. We've projected an image of Christians that have been baptized in pickle juice. And they're sour and they're dour and they're angry and they're judgmental. And good God, that's not what He intends for us. We are intended to be people with our own wonderfully wacky, weird style. You know, we spent a couple days in Paris. And I don't know if you follow men's fashion trends. Obviously, I don't, but that's a separate issue. But you can't miss it when you're in Paris, guys, because you see people. And here's the deal. There's really two looks that I saw. There's the snug, the trim fit, dark blue suit with a tie and a white shirt. That's very in right now. And very nice shoes. And then the other look, and it's equally as prevalent, if not more so than the first, it's a guy wearing loafers, no socks, with his pants rolled up above the ankles, and a scarf, a man's scarf, and they tie them and they wear them in all different ways. It is the look in Paris today. Trust me on this. And I thought, wouldn't it be funny if on Sunday morning I came out in loafers with my pants, don't get ahead of me here, with my pants rolled up, no socks, wearing the man's scarf. And then I thought, no, Jim, that's just going to be weird. People won't get it. Should I have done it? See, that's weird, all right? And that's the point. There ought to be a sense of joy in all of this and delight, because, you see, here, let me bring it home. Being a follower of Jesus means finding true joy and giving it away. Now, I am a keen observer of humans. I love to watch and listen to people, and it's fascinating. And when people talk about joy, true joy, genuine happiness, it is for most people a when-then equation. You know what I'm talking about? When I graduate, then I'll be happy. When I get a job, then I'll be happy. When I get married, then I'll be happy. When I have kids, then I'll be happy. When the kids move out of the house, then I'll be happy. Are you with me? It's a when-then equation for most people, and that's so wrong. Because you see, on this, John Lennon actually was right. Life is what happens when you're making other plans and you miss it if you're living a when-then equation in life. Because then is never now. And being a follower of Jesus means you find joy in the moment regardless of the circumstances of your life because you know He's with you and He loves you. And that makes all the difference in the world. And you see, when it changes you, when you find that joy, when you become wonderfully weird, when you are a follower of Jesus and you have your own sense of fashion and joy, it's refreshing, it's renewing, it's restorative. You're restored to Him, and it can't help but show. One of the places we went was in Cologne, Germany. We went to the cathedral there. And it's so cool. I brought these are pictures that I took. These are the stained glass windows inside the cathedral. They are nothing short of spectacular. This is a cathedral that was started in the 12th century and wasn't completed until the 19th century, over 600 years of construction. And I really shouldn't say it that way, actually, because when you look at the exterior, when you see the photos that I took outside, you can see the scaffolding and you realize this is an edifice that is always under a process of restoration at a cost of 30,000 euros a day, every week, every month, every year, just to maintain, just to keep from falling down. Now think about this. You're a more wondrous edifice, crafted and created to glorify God than anything made with human hands. But if you haven't done anything with your life and your faith until you gave your heart to Christ and professed your faith in Him, then don't you see it's all crumbling away to the point that our lives become indistinguishable from the world we inhabit? And God would change that. He would change you and He would change me. He would restore us. He would lead us to follow Him and find life and true joy and show us how to share it so that the world becomes a different place. And it all begins here when we accept Him in the depth of our being. Will you pray with me, please?